Really what we're trying to do here is create an experience, and the golf course is at the center of that. I feel it myself, and I've heard it so many times, like just my entire neurological system ramps down when I drive through the gates. I've been, as I said, like really fortunate to be a member at some amazing clubs, and also really fortunate to be a guest. And sometimes what happens, I think, as a guest is that the sort of neurological system ramps up, not down.
Yes.
Right. I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to embarrass my host. I don't want to, violate some unwritten rule or tradition. And so, we sort of consciously wanted to create a different culture around, what it was to be a member here and what it was to be a guest here. One of our amazing employees really coined this. She said, look, we treat our members are family, and our guests are like members. We broke a bunch of rules. One is, we don't just tolerate unaccompanied play, we encourage it. Our members are responsible for making sure that, folks who come here unaccompanied understand how it works and respect the way that we do things here, which is really just, don't let your fun get in the way of other people's fun.
Well, Mr. Walrath, thank you for making some time for us.
But you're going to have to eat like no Mr.
Okay. Michael, thank you for making time for us in your office here above the Ohoopee Clubhouse. As I'm sure you are aware, there are a lot of whispers or murmurs in what you might call the golf streets about your golf club here. Either people have played it, either they've met someone that has played it, they've heard a story about it, they see the Onion. It really does a lot of talking for itself. But there's one, I think, question in particular that comes up most often, so I'd like to lead with that. And that question is, how does one acquire a zebra? Why is there a zebra in Cobbtown, Georgia?
Yeah, well, there's quite a few now.
Okay, there's more.
Actually, I had a conversation with Pat, our general manager, on the way in today about do we need to start, figuring out what to do with some of this wildlife that. So it turns out there's a great story around the wildlife. So we actually have 4 species right now. We have zebras, wildebeests, five elans, oryx, and we recently acquired these. I think they're called black box. There's these little antelopes, which are prolific breeders. I think we started with 3 and we now have 7. So when we were building the place, it's a very unique landscape here, as you've seen, and it actually looks to me most. And I used to talk about this without having personally experienced it. I'd never been to the African savannah, but I did finally get to go a few years ago, and what we knew to be true from video and pictures turned out to be true, which is it's probably the most similar landscape that we found especially when you get out into the open meadow places. And so every time we would walk the routing, which was dozens of times, we kind of had this tradition. We would come out here and we would walk the front 9, and then it would be ungodly hot, and we would set up a field lunch with a local barbecue place underneath these trees to the left-hand side of 10. So if you're playing the 10th hole and there's these trees set off to the left-hand side, we would sit in the shade under there. First, we'd check and make sure there were no rattlesnakes on the ground, and then we would sit in the shade and eat barbecue. And we'd look out across the sort of 10th green in the meadow. And every time I would say something like, man, I think that looks like what Africa looks like. And we should have a giraffe. There should be some giraffes out there. And so it was a thing that became kind of a running joke. And then it turned into like 5% annoyance that everyone thought I was joking. And so I finally called Pat after a visit and I said, hey, see if you can get me a giraffe or 2. Which is a ridiculous thing to ask for. But I thought it would be funny if the next time we walked the routing, there were actually a couple of giraffes there. And so he called me back about a week later, and this is sort of the way Pat does things. And he says, look, it's not a good idea. Like giraffes I've done the research, and hilariously, there was just enough seriousness in this that he took it seriously. And so he says, bad news, the giraffes are a bad idea. They eat trees. We need to plant a lot of trees. They're huge. The fencing is serious business and all the other stuff. And so he kind of let me be deflated for about 10 seconds. And he goes, but good news, we can get lots of other stuff. And so he says we can have zebras and we can have wildebeest, and that's where we started. And it turns out you can buy these things in Texas. because you can pretty much get everything
Really?
in Texas.
Okay.
Yeah. And they have these large preserves where they have all sorts of animals, and you can go down there and you can shoot anything you want. And so Pat called up a couple of these places and inquired about acquiring some of these animals, and they said you can come down and shoot as many as you want. And he said, well, what if we wanted to actually not shoot them and just have them shipped? And they, I don't think the guy had ever gotten that question before, and he said, he goes, if you pay for the shipping, it costs the same to shoot them as it does to ship them. And so that's how we got our first batch of zebras and wildebeests. And we built a big enclosure, and
Everyone needs a Pat in their life. It seems like
everybody needs a Pat in their life.
Yeah. Go find me a giraffe. Go figure it out.
Yeah.
So could you take me back? When was the first time the idea of Ohoopee crystallized in your mind? And was it all of the things, all of the elements that we see here today, the match play, the family style dining, the wildlife? Was it all, was all of that come to you at once, or was it one thing and then iterative over time?
It was iterative for sure. So in some ways it was it was just a fantasy. So going back, I grew up in northern Fairfield County, Connecticut, which is the unfancy part of Fairfield County. I played my golf on a 9-hole municipal golf course with a great backstory. It was actually the personal practice facility of Gene Sarazen.
Okay. What was it called?
It was called Sunset Hill Golf Club when I played there.
Okay.
We had 9 holes, 1 bunker on the golf course. There was exactly 1 greenside bunker and no fairway bunkers. And there was only 1 because when Sarazen built it as a practice facility, he only needed 1 bunker to practice in. He also didn't expect anyone else to ever play the routing, so we had fairways crossing. We had the first hole was a par 5 that played down a hill, and then the 5th hole was a par 4 that played back up the same hill. So as you were you'd hit your tee ball and you'd walk down 1, you were always hyper aware of balls coming off the 5th tee that would be coming at you, and vice versa. So walking up the worst was walking up the hill on 5 because you couldn't see the tee balls on 1 that would be coming, basically straight at your head. So we used to refer to it as Helmet Hill. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's sort of a sidebar. But for me growing up in an amazing family, but kind of the low end of middle class in that part of the world, I don't think I played my first golf on a private golf course until I was in my mid-20s. It just wasn't part of the world. And so, to call this anything other than you wouldn't even fantasize about it to build something like this. That happened more over a period of years, and it happened a little more accidentally. And it kind of started around my 40th birthday. As the story goes, I was very overserved late into the evening of my 40th birthday, spending time I had a group of high school and college friends who had all come to this party that my wife threw for me. And somewhere along, after way too many cocktails, I vowed that we were not going to lose touch with each other and that we were going to go on a golf trip every year together and that I was going to host it. And so I started hosting a annual trip for my friends, and it was really just about staying in touch. And then I was an English literature major, and so I kind of processed through words. And so after each trip, I would write what could have made that trip better. So the first year we went to Sea Island, it was great. We tried private clubs, we did public. We sort of tried a bunch of different ways, and every time there was a list of things that could have been better. It would have been great if we didn't have to, go figure out how to pay for an emergency night. It would be great if everyone wasn't wrestling over the drink bill and the check bill and things like that. And so that kind of culminated after 4 or 5 years in this 20-page manifesto that was really written about kind of what the club, what would the sort of the club built for that friends trip really look like.
Interesting. So it comes out of sampling all these places and kind of extracting what you would change.
Yeah.
What about places that maybe you took from what you liked?
Yeah.
What places inspired you?
Oh, I mean, we just took everything from all those. So over the course of my sort of career and life in golf, I went from having very little. I played high school golf, probably the worst golf team in the history of the state of Connecticut, but we had a lot of fun. Was nowhere near good enough to play any kind of Division I college golf or anything like that, and so. But I had no real understanding of what these sort of temples of golf were because I had no experience with them. I didn't grow up that way. In building this place, we focused a lot on the things we loved, and sort of there are homages throughout this place to, the places that had become, in my 30s and 40s, like a special part of, experiencing a different kind of the way this world works and the relationships that got built around that. So like, you wouldn't necessarily see it, but our locker room in a lot of ways is meant to be a kind of smaller version of, and very different version of the Seminole locker room, which I think is one of the most special locker rooms in certainly in America.
Tall, kind of open vertical lockers.
Big open, yeah. I mean, we don't have, because we're not a community club. We're not or even, there's Foot Lockers, right? We don't have these big tall lockers, but what we have is a big open room.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a miniaturized version of a large open room where you're not hiding in nooks and crannies. Everybody's there, and it's very social.
Yeah.
We put a lot of thought into how do we create, kind of the bar and the dining areas in a way that creates sociability, and and again, these are like, I'd say, like very not necessarily overt homages. So like, it only makes sense if you spend a lot of time there. But the back porch at National. In a lot of ways, like our fire pit looking over the lake and the connection to the bar there was our way of saying, like, that's a really special place in the sort of pantheon of golf, is to sit on that back porch at National,
have a south side,
watch the sunset, and so in a funny way, like, we have our own, I'd say, very different version of that same idea.
But the intent underneath it is the same.
It's the feeling we're trying to get to, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the and most of, I wouldn't say that at the root of what we created was critical of other experiences. It was just, the more I did this, visited these amazing golf places, and had the privilege of participating there as a guest, and then ultimately as a member at some of these places. It was, I think, what kept coming back to me was they're all incredible, but none of them are really programmed exactly for the, this is a trip with my close friends, right? And we're going to do this thing that we do where we all get together and we play matches, and we all stink at golf, but we have a great time doing it. And so it was less about like there is anything wrong with any of the experiences we had. It was more about how do we create something that sort of transcends and is so hyper focused on this singular thing of like being with your friends, and try to cut away as much of the other friction as we could from the whole process.
Very interesting. Where does the you might have just answered it, but the match play element that comes from just wanting to enjoy your round more than keeping, playing poorly, and that's a bummer sometimes when you're on a trip and you just can't put it in play. Yeah,
well, I think it's a lot of things. So I think it's my ultimately, a big part of it is my inadequacy as a competitive amateur golfer. So I grew up playing high school, as I said, and was okay, right? Like good enough to be the fourth or fifth guy on a not very good team. And then really, kind of fell out of golf early, my kind of after college when I was building businesses and having a family and things, play a couple times a year. And then like just fell like passionately back in love with it in my early 30s, and got better at it. So I was able to play. I say I was good enough to play a lot of like kind of Met area mid-am type events. I was never gonna. I could qualify and I could play. I was never gonna win anything.
Which is something into itself. I mean, that's these are not easy tournaments to qualify for.
No, and like you like that was winning. Winning was qualifying for the Met Amateur or the whatever it was. and so, but one of the things I experienced in that process was like I was trying really hard to be better at golf, and at some point, I lost the sort of I think a lot of people to go through like I just kind of lost the joy in it, and I was grinding so hard and trying to be better, and so some of it, there's a part of it that's just frustration with like I got to go out there and I got to keep score, and if I go triple bogey the first hole, like it kind of ruins my day, and so that was part of it. I think another part of it was, just was pace of play, and it's a lot slower when every ball has to go in the hole. So if you program the whole experience around like, not just you shouldn't try to make your 15-footer for bogey because you're thinking about the score you're going to post, right? Which I think is this culture of like, I got to make every putt because I got to post a score can be really annoying. And so not only did we sort of go out of our way to like not have people do that, but we actually went out of our way to aggressively, sort of shame people who are doing that into like, that's not how we do it here.
Sure.
And so nobody wants to watch you try to make a 15-footer for bogey because you're thinking about telling everyone what you shot or or posting a score. So you can't post a score here.
Right.
And if you start walking into the bar and you tell everyone what you shot, you're going to get made. The bartenders, will flip the coaster at you that says no one cares. Right. Yes. And so, yeah, I think it was really about trying to create an environment where you had to, if you can have fun here, you probably can. Right. Because the best part of every match recap is like the hole you won with a double because, your partner, your opponent made a triple.
Yes. Carnage.
Yeah.
Yes. One thing I just, I'm curious about is, how really high quality experiences, what percentage of it is, very meticulously curated and intentional, and what parts are kind of happy accidents, as you said. For example, one of the more memorable places about this thing is the drive-in from the front gate. It's about you go down a couple dirt roads, you see a couple onion signs, and then you hit the gate, and then it's another 90 seconds, 2 minutes through this African sort of savanna, as you describe it. And some might say, wow, Michael's a genius. He put the gate out here to really kind of blow your mind and raise your heart rate as you're looking for a golf course.
Right.
And you might tell me that, well, that's just the only logical place for a gate. Otherwise, people wouldn't find this place ever. So I guess my question is, could you speak to being super intentional and meticulous in everything from the clubhouse and range and stuff, and how much is just you found an unbelievable property, and you're able to build around it.
Yeah, well, that's a big part of it. I mean, I was looking for a special piece of property, and ultimately, I think we found an extraordinary piece of property. Far more, land than we needed to do the project. Really amazing sand, just like everything about it. But it's funny you mentioned the road. The road is the $1 million road that wasn't. So when you do this, the only thing we really had here was there was nearby power. So the local power authority was willing to run power to the property. But everything else you have to build, right? So we had to build wastewater, and we had to build fresh water, and we had to build all the buildings and kind of all the infrastructure and everything, which is really interesting. You learn more about what you sort of than you think you're going to learn about how this stuff happens. And so the road was a really interesting discussion. We had great contractor partners and design partners, and they came in with this proposal to build a proper 15-foot wide or 20-foot wide or whatever it is, like concrete reinforced road, and it was like $1 million road, right? And that road would have been pretty much from the guardhouse to the clubhouse. So it's like 1.5 miles or something like that. The property's big. And so, I sort of, you kind of looked at this proposal and then we started talking. We're like, is that really the road we want? Like, I don't really want to pay $1 million for a road, but is that the road we want? And if you described it. So the last, 3 miles of your journey to our property line is on county maintained clay roads, Georgia classic clay roads. They're like incredibly picturesque, and they're a pain in the neck to, like, when it rains, they got to come out and they got to basically regrade the road. Yeah. And so we started thinking about that experience, and like, you have this amazing, picturesque, beautiful drive, and then you hit this like, totally out of place, wide, perfectly engineered concrete $1 million road, and it didn't make sense. And so we also didn't want to spend the money. And so, I think when those things align, and you start finding that like, hey, the thing that actually turns out to be the most natural thing is usually also the most economical thing. You get this marriage of like the way it's supposed to be, and it feels like how it's supposed to be.
Right.
And I think it creates, I think what I've learned is it almost creates like a timelessness when you do it the way that it, like, you're not fighting the land. It's
not trying too hard.
No, and I mean, we tried hard to make this place awesome, right? So it's not like, this wasn't, it's not an accident. But I think you can fight it too much, right? And you can over-engineer it. And then what you get is something that's like, it's discordant, right? If this place was, Gil talks about it a lot as he talks about the tapestry. And he says like the feeling that we wanted on the golf course here was the feeling of the old tapestry, where like in the middle of the tapestry, it's like the knit is still really tight and the colors are pretty vibrant, but the edges are eroding.
Yes.
And I think that they accomplish that amazingly well on the golf course here, where, when you play this golf course, there's no hard edges. The Bermuda grass is desperately trying to grow into the waist, but it doesn't have the nutrients or the water to do it. And so you get these kind of frayed edges of the golf course.
Yes.
And in a lot of ways, I think that's the only appropriate way for this golf course to sit on this land.
Yes. I had a conversation once with, oh my God, Doug, I'm going to blank on his last name, owns Lookout Mountain down in Georgia. Okay. We played. And we were talking about some of our favorite golf clubs, National Golf Links.
Sure.
Mine, Newport Country Club.
Yep.
Some of these places. And he said, oh, those are, as he's standing over the ball, he said, oh, those are Frayed khaki clubs.
Yeah.
And I said, what's that? He's like, well, everyone has on nice khakis, but they're a little worn around the edges. And if you see like at these, these places that you imagine are pristine, two of those are no irrigation kind of clubs. Even Seminole, it's not overly manicured. And that just kind of leads to this feeling, like you said, of natural is sometimes better.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that in other environments, people try too hard to create that look when it's not the natural look. So in places where you have, plenty of water and concrete paths and things like that, these more manicured, what I think of as like the striped golf courses and the ones with like different cuts of rough and things like that, like they make perfect sense in certain places and they don't make sense elsewhere. So
yes,
a lot of what we do here is I think, and this started as an idea and this, kind of manifesto, and, but it's really just become a culture, is like, is it going to make sense? Right. So it's like, you have this great piece in the Current that you wrote about, Keith and the way that he does the food here. And I thought, like, as I was reading it, even just this idea of like, we're going to go, we're going to put a whole lamb into a spit, into a rack, and we're going to roast it over the fire pit. Like, there's a lot of places where if you did that, it would feel contrived. It would feel, and here it just feels right. And so, in a lot of cases, I never thought of doing that. He thought of doing that.
Yes.
And when he was like, what do you think? I was, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
He had this, and thank you for the plug, by the way. You can read about
Please do read it. It's amazing.
The family style dining program here, which is, I would love to ask you about, because I found it really unique. It was kind of the one thing that nobody seemed to mention to me before the first time I came here with my dad. Yeah, Keith said, I want to cook how Ohoopee looks. Yeah. I was like, I have no idea what that means. I was talking to him on the phone.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I'm just going to roast the lamb over an open fire by 18 greens. So as people come off the green, they can pick some skin and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. But to the point about, this family style dining, this is another thing that encourages community and socialization.
Yeah.
Did you have any, I guess, where did that idea come from for you? Is this another one where it's like, well, budget-wise it makes sense and operationally it makes sense, or were you, was that something you took from somewhere else?
No, I mean, I'm not sure that inventing anything matters here, right?
Sure.
I think it's like, I'm not sure there's anything new to be invented, right? I think what we do is we we remix or repurpose great ideas, right? And so what I think we're going for with the food program, where it's a layered thing again. So food has always been a really important part of my life. I grew up working in restaurants, and around that stuff. My wife has a restaurant business. She has 5 restaurants on Long Island. And by the way, I think it's like the hardest business in the world. And so, but we also are kind of big believers that food is either poison or nourishment. And so we wanted food that was nourishment, right? That was real food. And what I specifically didn't want was all the friction and delays of, you go on these trips with your friends, and it's hard to wrangle everybody into being where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And then you start adding, well, okay, this guy's late. He fell asleep and he's still in the shower, and so we got to wait for him. And all the menus are sitting on the table, and the whole cadence and the pace of everything just sort of gets out of whack. And so much of what we do here is designed to alleviate the burden of decision making from everybody who's here all the time. So the way we do the food program, the way we price everything on a per diem basis, the way we're flexible with how all the economics of visiting here work and things like that. All of it is really designed to eliminate friction. There is also an accountability element to it. So when you don't have a menu, there really aren't any excuses for anything coming out of that kitchen not being extraordinary, right? There's no we always have the Cobb salad on the menu, and the tomatoes aren't very good, right? But we got to have the Cobb salad, right? So Keith will be the first one to tell you if, and by the way, this has never happened to me here, but if something comes out of that kitchen that's not awesome, it's entirely on him, because no one told him you have to make this or you have to make that. And so he has, it's as total freedom to put whatever he wants on the table. The only sort of implicit contract is that whatever you send out here better be great.
Yeah.
And I think it's an amazing canvas for him to work on that way.
Is it not pretty ballsy though to say there's all these high profile people I imagine coming in and out the door here, you will eat what we serve and you will like it?
There's an element of and again, this is credit to the team, right? There's a culture of yes, we're going to impose that on you, but behind that is we're going to know a lot about what you can and can't eat or will and won't eat.
Yes, that's true.
And so every group that comes here, has a briefing, effectively a briefing call with our reservations team beforehand to make sure that we know, are there allergies in the group? Are there things people can eat or won't eat? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things you'll notice is that really the meal is bespoke. And so I like to use Morgan Hoffman as the reference here. So Morgan's a great friend and a member here, and his diet is unusual, and this has been kind of well documented.
Is it mostly grapes still? Or
there was a time when it was all grapes.
All grape, 800 grapes a day.
Yeah, 3 weeks of just seeded red grapes.
Yeah. And the guy looks phenomenal. I don't know why we're all not doing this.
Well, yeah, I think he was after, I think Morgan,
yes.
It's well done. He was doing something, that's not how he eats now.
Yes.
But, there was and again, I'm not sure what his diet looks like now, but there was a time when it was raw vegan, right? Mm-hmm. And so you would think that's a real challenge when you're serving lots of beef and things like that. I think our kitchen saw it as, here's a great opportunity for us to show that we can do raw vegan in a way that's really special. So Morgan, had an experience that was he had his own curated sort of fixed menu, but they didn't ask him exactly what do you want. They just made him an amazing raw vegan meal.
Yes.
And so there's a lot, very few people come in here, I think, and sit down at dinner and they're like, oh, there's nothing here that I can eat. And right now we've got 24 young people here between, I think, 15 and 17 years old. And it's really cool to watch Keith and Ashley and their team kind of just shift the menu a little bit. And so it's our menu, but it's just a little bit more shifted towards, sort of a younger demographic. And the cheesy mashed potatoes he made last night were just extraordinary.
If everything's coming out of this manifesto with your, friends group trip, I'm curious then on two two things in what it said in the manifesto. One, no TVs in the cabins, and two, extraordinary water pressure in the shower.
Yeah, yeah. So extraordinary water pressure in the shower is not a new idea.
No,
right?
there's a culture of great post.
There's a culture of great showers in golf, and we can all debate. Like for me, it's still the back shower at Deepdale, right?
Wow.
That is the best shower in golf.
Better than Marion, better than
Marion, better than Friar's Head, better than here. Like there's one shower at Deepdale that I think still has all the original plumbing. And it's, if you open your mouth, you might drown. And so, I've never seen a shower that actually beats that shower. And it may be that when those pipes break, they're going to not be able to replicate it because, state of New York or whatever. And so, we put a lot of time into the shower, and it turns out a lot goes into that. You
had to build the water system. Yeah.
You have to build the water system. You have to make sure you have enough water going through there. You have to upsize your hot water heaters and things like that. And then you ultimately also have to, if you forget to upsize your drainage system, then you're going to have so in our case, I think here, we happen to have abundant water. The water is local. So it's not, I don't think we're doing anything so crazy. But it was a comedy during the sort of building process where the architect and the builder would say, are we really going to talk about the shower again? And we're like, yeah, we're going to talk about it until we are sure. No TVs in the room is an interesting one. I actually think that people think it's more of a statement of ethics or morality than it actually is. I think for me, it was a really personal experience of going to. You have this experience where you go to a place like Pine Valley, which is an amazing place, right? And you have these incredible golf days, and then you have these like completely over the top meals, and there's more drinks than there should be, and things like that. And you wind up at some point back in your room, and like just instinctively you turn on that TV, right? And all of a sudden it's 2:00 in the morning, and I've got a 7:30 tee time the next morning, and I'm watching Bloodsport. Right, for no reason, right? And so the whole no TVs in the room thing was really more of a we're gonna save everybody from that than it was a you're not allowed to watch TV. Everyone has a TV in their pocket. They've got an iPad. They've got a laptop, and we have TVs everywhere, right? So, but we're not trying to necessarily force people into communal consumption of televisions, but. I think most of pretty much the only thing people are watching here is live sports. So
yeah, well, it's very thoughtful of you to get everyone to bed on time.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those where you rarely wake up in the morning, with a sore head, going to play golf and think I'm really glad I stayed awake and watched Bloodsport last night.
Really glad I caught the last 30 of failure to launch again. I mean, a lot of people have overserved ideas on, grand ideas after a couple of drinks with their friends. I think a lot of people probably have sat in the Dunvegan and said, I'm going to buy a place here and I'm going to move to Scotland. Very few people actually do. So, what was the hardest part about following through? Why did you stay with it? I imagine, once you start, everyone has these ideas. I'm going to build a golf course. I'm going to get my friends together. When it comes time to build the trip or, do the plumbing and water pressure, I think a lot of people would quit.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you have the right team around you, and I think this is true of everything I've ever done is with the right team, hard becomes fun. Right. It becomes, I can overcome something and we can overcome something together. The hardest part of something like this is I think the stepping off point. It's am I completely out of my mind? I felt this way when I started my first company. I felt this way 4 years ago when I went back into the seat of a challenged public company. I certainly felt this way in 2015 and 16 when I was looking at properties and thinking about, actually, doing what had really become a sort of a fantasy through that manifesto. And so it's the leap, I think, is the part once you've done that, you better be committed, right? Because like getting this thing halfway done and not finishing it with quality is the nightmare. That's the disaster. But it also just, having the right people around you is everything. And this team, the building, the team, the architects, Gil and his team, Joel Newman from Thomas and Denziger, who I almost didn't hire because he had done a lot of low country work and we didn't want low country work, turned out to be awesome. He fought me on two things. He fought me on the TVs and he fought me on the borough rooms without their own bathrooms. But he wasn't a golf person, so it's sort of, we turns out I was going to win that fight anyway. But other than that, he did an exceptional job for us. The Fraser Construction who did the building. I'm going to plug everybody now who did the building. But then, the other amazing thing about this was our general manager, Pat, our superintendent, Rhett, and our head pro, Todd. They were all here, from the beginning of the construction phase, which was great because it meant no excuses. Right, like Rhett wasn't allowed to tell me that, I can't make the golf course the way that we want the golf course to be because some stupid decision got made during construction, because he was here every day during construction. When you put a team like that together and you really have a team full of A players, your probability of succeeding is just it goes up dramatically.
What do you tell yourself when you ask the question, have I completely lost my mind? What ultimately keeps you moving in that direction?
It's a combination of, I think knowing that you've done it before, that you've done things that are sort of, conceived. Maybe it's irrational, self-confidence that the way that I see the world is actually the way that there will be, sort of value around it. And so, there was a really important validation for me early on talking to people in this world about the value of having something different. So one of the most, I think most validating things that I experienced in talking about the concept with people who I really trusted were some of our early members, founding members, who really didn't need another golf club, right? But who I think resonated with there's something unique here, there's something different here. This is a place where I can send, my adult, son or daughter. I can't do that at any of the other clubs I belong to. This is a place where I can bring a large group, right? I can't do that at any other clubs I belong to. This is a place where I can get away from everything. I don't have that at all the other clubs I belong to. So I don't know where it happens. I think somewhere along the way, whether you're building a company or you're building a golf course or you're, or you're writing a book or whatever it is, there comes a point where you sort of gain enough confidence that even though it looks crazy to the outside world, you're pretty convinced it's not. And for me, that's part of the process.
At what point did you stop having doubts that people would come all the way to Coptown, Georgia to play this place? Did you have doubts?
I mean, you never know, right, until you get there. I think one of the things that, and by the way, by the time you get to this part, it's it's too late. So, you almost don't want to know at points. But we played the golf course before there was grass on it, right? And I actually would say to people, hey, do you want to come down and see it? And, they're like, well, what do you mean? Is it done? And I said, no, it's not done, but we can walk it, right? And so we had these sort of hilarious expeditions where we would come down with walk in our hiking boots and super hot and buggy and the middle of construction. And we had we'd bring little mats and we would hit shots off the mats. And I think, part of it was seeing people react to just the landscape and just the way the place was. It increased the confidence that we were, on the right track and on the right path.
And this land, correct? I mean, we don't have to go too deep into this because you can read all about it in Golfers Journal number 10.
That's right.
And but this land was it a known sort of commodity in the golf world? It had been looked at by more than you leading up to this. It
had been part of a project that a developer had bought the land, all of it, in I think 2006, 2007. As I understand it, they were going to build like sort of a Discovery Land Co. style development here with a racetrack, and they had hired Gill and Davis Love to build the golf course. And so, I think that would have been a successful project. Unfortunately, I think for them, and fortunately for me, the financial crisis just sort of shut it down. And ultimately, I think the banks took back the land, and it was unfortunately just a sort of wrong, probably right idea, wrong time.
Yeah.
And so, it was almost 10 years later when, Gill, he says he forgot about it. I think he was testing to see whether I actually had the resolve to do it before he told me about the piece of land. And ultimately, it was sort of as soon as I saw it, it was here or nowhere.
Yeah. So it was hiding in Gill's catalog somewhere. Like,
again, he'll tell you, and I'm not saying he's a liar, but he'll tell you that he and I were talking. We visited other properties. I was looking at all these bird hunting plantations, like kind of south of here, and every time I would send him. He said, "Just send me a topo map," and so I would send him these topo maps, and his response was typically, "Look, it's all flat red clay. Like you can build golf there, but you should hire somebody else to do it." And so after about 6 months of this, and I think he realized that I wasn't going to settle for some mediocre piece of ground. I was driving down the LIE one day, and he called me and he said, "Hey, are you in your Tesla?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Pull over and pull up that big map you have and type in Cobbtown, Georgia." And so I did it. And I'm like, "All right, I don't see anything." And he goes, "Just look west and you'll see the racetrack." And I was like, "Okay, this does." But scrolled a little bit west, and there's this sort of weird, like fuzzy outline of a racetrack in the big meadow where the animals are now. And I said, "Okay, I see it." And he said, "That's it." He goes, "That's your piece of land. Buy that piece of land and I'll build you an amazing golf course." And so it had turned out that the only thing that the last group had done was they had taken dozers and they had graded a Formula One style racetrack into that meadow.
Okay.
Never put any infrastructure, never, talk about like $1 million road. I don't know what it costs to build a Formula One racetrack. But if you fly over today, you can actually still see the outlines of those curves and the straightaway and things like that. And some of it's kind of incorporated into the outer edges of the golf course.
Was Gil Hance the only man for the job in your mind, or did you take a look around the industry and see what people were doing?
Gil wasn't the only. I think we could have built great golf here. I'd gotten to know Gil through a mutual friend, and we'd spent a bunch of time together, and we'd actually trespassed a bunch together, which I think is really where the bond of when you start trespassing on golf courses that you might want to acquire. But you don't really want people, necessarily people to know that you are in the market for the golf course.
Yeah.
He and I did a little trespassing together. So you just kind of, he was my first choice. I think there are amazing architects out there, and there's a whole generation of amazing young architects coming up. I think it's an amazing time for anybody who might be thinking about doing something like this. There's a lot of talent out there. I knew Core Crenshaw a little bit from. I knew their work from playing a lot of their golf courses, and I was a member at East Hampton Golf Club for a long time. So had a ton of respect for those folks and knew Doak by reputation. And at the time in 2015, I didn't know any of the sort of today's kind of young up and coming architects. But the only thing that would have I think brought had me bring somebody else on would have been if Gil hadn't been able to do it.
Sure.
Because I was a little impatient once I decided to do it. We had to go. But the timing worked out great. They had just finished the Olympic course and Stream Song. And I think we got them before they were sort of impossible to hire.
Sure. Sort of kind of winding down the how I built Ohoopee segment, but there's this you mentioned it earlier, is very small membership that you sort of targeted.
Yeah.
I don't know what that number is today, but it's quite small.
Yeah.
But there is, I think, a very unique policy and rules here that allow a lot of guest golfers every year. Why did you decide to do this? And I'll let you explain kind of the program if you'd like. But was it important to you that people that people played this golf course, basically, when members weren't around.
Yeah, I think I want people to play the golf course. I want them to experience the experience here. I think what we're trying to do is create really what we're trying to do here is create an experience, and the golf course is at the center of that. And I feel it myself, and I've heard it so many times, like just my entire neurological system ramps down when I drive through the gates. And it's funny, like, I've been, as I said, like really fortunate to be a member at some amazing clubs, and also really fortunate to be a guest. And sometimes what happens, I think, as a guest is that the sort of neurological system ramps up, not down.
Yes.
Right. I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to embarrass my host. I don't want to, violate some unwritten rule or tradition. And so, we sort of consciously wanted to create a different culture around, what it was to be a member here and what it was to be a guest here. And I never said this or wrote this down, but one of our amazing employees really coined this where, I don't know when it started happening a couple of years ago. She said, look, like, and the staff really created this, is like, we treat our members our family, and our guests are like members. And I think in a lot of ways, like, it's the kind of thing that had to happen pretty organically, but we see a lot of the same guests, both accompanied and unaccompanied here. At the root of how we decided to do it with a very small, less than 100 person membership here, but an incredibly expansive accompanied and unaccompanied guest policy. So we broke a bunch of rules. One is, we don't just tolerate unaccompanied play, we encourage it. Our members are responsible for making sure that, folks who come here unaccompanied understand how it works and respect the way that we do things here, which is really just, don't let your fun get in the way of other people's fun. And then also just, I think one of the other really unique things we do here is the ability to bring very large groups. Yeah. So every one of our members really has the opportunity to, bring, up to 48 people for a couple of days. And that's great from an operating standpoint, and it's great from kind of staying busy. But it also, by the way, just makes my life easier, right? I don't have to manage hundreds of members and the complexities that come with all that, and the team doesn't have to either. And so, it's turned into, I think, a really happy, different way to operate. I'm not going to call it an accident, but it was more of a sort of an evolution.
Sure. I imagine there's no boards or committees here.
We have we have any number of committees at any given time, but we have a very strict rule about the construction of committees, which is has to be an odd number, has to be less than 3. I'd say the committee that is the least appreciated here is the handicap committee. Okay. For member events. It's very much a black box, and no one really knows how it works. But the handicaps are carefully curated.
Okay, I can only venture to guess where the suggestion box might be.
So you may have heard we had a big sort of catastrophic dam break last year here. Yep. Which thankfully is now behind us, and the team has done an amazing job of actually improving the dam that holds our main lake together. But we like to say that the suggestion box is typically strapped around the back of a 10-foot alligator that swims around that lake. So unfortunately, it may have been washed downstream in the dam break.
That's about where I thought it would be, somewhere in that big body of water.
Yeah. We'll at some point find a replacement for that.
Yeah. You mentioned your stress levels sort of settling as you drive through the gates here. I think there's a wonderful kind of contradiction in your job, your career, digital advertising, technology, now into AI, search, all these sorts of things. Yeah. Helping people find brands, find companies. Mm-hmm. And then your website for Ohoopee, which is, we call it minimalist. Yes. It says Ohoopee Match Club, Cobbtown, Georgia. And I don't think there are any other buttons.
I think there may be an info at email address. Yeah.
Yes, info at.
There's some beautiful pictures on that.
They're beautiful pictures. Yeah. But I imagine this is a nice change of pace for you personally, from your day job.
Yes, for sure. I think the gift of this place, and in many ways the gift of, I think, a lot of, again, I'm not big on comparisons, and we're not trying to compare this place to the sort of iconic golf places that we love so much and have been around for far longer than we have. But one of the things that makes those places so amazing is that time moves kind of slowly there, right? And that the you can take a very long view, right? So it is a juxtaposition to running a public software company during probably, maybe, arguably the kind of the greatest transformational technology shift that we may ever experience in our lifetimes, which I've sort of been through several of these now.
Yeah.
Right? So the internet was the greatest transformational shift that I'd ever experienced. And then, sort of mobile and social, as shifts came along. And I don't know if they were bigger than the internet, but they were big. And now, a lot of people believe, and I wouldn't argue with it, that AI will be the biggest, sort of technological shift we've ever seen as human beings. And so in that world where, the pace of change is, sort of tectonic shifts every day, and then running a company that is on a quarterly cadence and is required to all the public stuff, you can get really, really sucked into this, sort of everything is an emergency right now, and so having something like this that I can think in terms of, like I like to say, I hope to be around here bothering people for a long time. Right, I'm hoping that the sort of the wave of human longevity allows me to still be here in 50 or 60 or 70 years, and probably driving everybody crazy.
Picking very favorable tee boxes.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, exactly. That's the goal. Like some of my great heroes today who are in their 80s and 90s, and they take you out there and they beat the pants off you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's a completely different time scale, and it's one of the great gifts for me of this is, like, when I think about this, and I don't really think about this as a business, but I think about it as a project. It's a project that, like, it's kind of the only project, business project in my life that actually I expect to outlive me. And so in that way, it blends business and family, and sort of how do you create something that lasts longer than you will.
Sure. If you did view it as a business, though, do you think are golf courses good investments?
No.
Are good businesses?
No. I mean, I would say it's hard to think of probably a worse financial investment.
Really?
I mean, if you think of it in terms of like, sort of the capital that you deploy and the way that the capital comes back to you. I think
Sure.
in that scenario, I'm sure there are. I've heard that, like, Formula One racing teams are giant, sort of bad investments typically. Boats, I think, are probably really bad investments. But that's only on the sort of through the single lens of, like, we sort of deploy capital to compound a return on that capital. What I would say is that, I have, if you think about enrichment as more than just capital allocation and compounding returns, then nothing, other than, sort of finding the right partner in my life, my wife, Michelle, and building a family has enriched my life more than this project. And so, it's a bad as a capitalist, it's a bad investment, but as a human being, it's a pretty great one.
Sure. If you have your investor hat on, your capitalist hat on, is there any places in golf, maybe not golf courses, but are there any sort of segments of golf that you think are interesting from an investment standpoint? Like as golf is changing since you opened Ohoopee, I imagine you're monitoring trends very closely in the way the world is changing from a consumer psychology behavior standpoint. Is there anything that you're interested in golf, like that you think might be on the come up? This could be, indoor golf or, entertainment, pockets of entertainment that we're seeing with TGL. Anything like that that's interesting?
I find it all really interesting. I was a very early investor in Grayson, and have been incredibly impressed with what Charlie and that team have done. I love the brand. I love kind of everything that they've done, and I am thrilled to have been a part of it since the beginning. And I think through that lens, the company is doing a lot with these with kind of indoor golf and other sort of opportunities like that. So to me, it's all interesting in much the same way that these shifts we're seeing in technology are super interesting. I'm also grateful that I've kind of made my I've made my bet in this space, right? And so people ask me all the time, like, would you do another one? Are there other Ohoopees to be built? Are there, would you build a series of these things? And, I think my answer to that is, fairly patently no. Like, this is a thing that I've done, and I'd much rather spend the next, sort of 50 or 60 or 70 years, if I can get that much, just tweaking this and focusing on this than try to. So, it's an interesting mindset to be in, because as entrepreneurs, I think a lot of the time we feel almost compelled to participate in these trend shifts. When it comes to golf in particular, I don't feel any compulsion to participate. So I can watch it happen, and I can root on all the people who are creating innovation and trying things. And I think trying things is one of the great, sort of human traits, right? We try things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work. But there's a level of also just, I'm very happy to have a thing to work on in this space without having to feel compelled to go chase the whatever the next bright shiny object is.
Sure. What do you make? There was a question I wanted to ask you, which I fear I know the answer now, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Which is, in 2018 there were 12 new golf courses the year this opened, and now there's upwards of 30.
Yep.
Things like that. You hear back to the golf streets again. You hear, there's an Ohoopee spinoff coming to Central Florida, and there's another Ohoopee spinoff, which I'm not really sure what that means.
Yeah.
Since you've stated already that you're not building any more of these.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, would you, if it were 2025, would you have tried to build Ohoopee again in this current kind of golf climate where there's more options than there were in 2018?
Yeah. I like to think I would, right? That had the world just worked in a different way. I mean, part of the reason why this happened for me when it happened was just the cadence of my career. I was very fortunate and sold my first company, in 2007, right before the sort of financial meltdown, and spent 2 or 3 years, almost 3 years, working at Yahoo during a really turbulent, interesting time in that world, right? So I sort of exited that world in 2010, kind of on plan. And I had a young family, and I was pretty burnt out at that point. It had been a huge sprint. And I just said to myself at that point, like, I'm not going to operate anything. And so it gave me time, maybe too much time at times, to explore other things and to be really active and involved in my kids' lives, and my, and give Michelle time that she was owed from me being gone all the time, building the first company. And so for 4 or 5 years, I really, didn't think too much about what was going to happen in the future. And then, this started to percolate, and so it just, the timing of it was like, I didn't want to go back into, and I still at that time said I would never go back into a sort of technology company operating seat at scale. I ultimately violated that promise to myself about almost 4 years ago. But I think the point is that during that period of time, I hit a point where I needed something more than just being an investor and just dabbling. And this happened to come along at the perfect time because it filled a void of having something to focus on, but it didn't require this like full return to the what turns out to be kind of the 24/7 cadence of being a technology operator.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe like that's would have happened anyway. Maybe it would have happened now. Maybe it would have happened 5 or 10 years from now. Maybe someone else would have built exactly what I wanted and I wouldn't have felt compelled to do it. But in a lot of ways, this was really just, kind of feeling like there was a gap and feeling like we could close it and that would be really rewarding and interesting to do it.
Yeah. Why did you decide to go back to work?
Every decision that I've made in my professional career has been sort of guided by a potentially irrational belief that there's a really difficult but solvable problem, and almost certainly an overly optimistic point of view on how difficult it would be. Right. So I had been involved with Yext, the company that I'm running today, for a long time. I was chairman for almost 12 years. And the founding team was an incredible team, but the company had really hit sort of a rough patch, and it was time for a significant change. So I had done the only thing that like a good chairman does, which is hire a recruiting firm to go find a CEO, because it wasn't going to be me. But along that process, I sort of came to realize that there was a really neat, asset here and some incredible people. And that all culminated in me spending a lot of time trying to talk myself out of it. And my wife, Michelle, ultimately, I'll never forget, we're sitting on the floor of our living room in Florida. We had just moved from Florida. The company's headquartered in New York. Just moved to Florida. The company's headquartered in New York. And she looks at me, and she's known me since I was 19 years old. And she said, "So how much longer will we pretend that you're not going to do this?" Which was really her way of saying, you have to. And she wasn't wrong. Like, I did feel like I had to. I think I've been, my excessive optimism in March of 2022 around the pace of recovery in the markets has been, I've been humbled. But also, it's been an incredibly rewarding experience to fight that fight. And the company's going through, I think, a potential transition now, which is not something I'll talk a lot about.
Yeah.
Can talk a lot about. But I'm really proud of what we've accomplished, and I think there's a really bright future for the company ahead. So, it's like hard work is hard. And I think, my team will attest to the fact that like we've had to embrace the suck over the last few years. But I do believe ultimately that these are the periods where innovation starts to accelerate. We get these kind of post shakeup, and anytime, and this might just be personal bias, anytime you get a fundamental tectonic plate shift in usually driven by technology, and you're coming out of a disrupted period, a recessionary period, or you get, almost every time what you see is this like flourishing, this like post wildfire, explosion of growth. And I think that's coming. I think it's hard to predict exactly when it's going to be here.
Yeah. What does your day, a normal day, look like for you?
Yeah.
Like during this, like, is it, I imagine with the pace at which, software technology is moving, this could be a, manic, like you said, 24/7 experience. There's also CEOs and leaders that, like Jeff Bezos says, likes to putter around in the morning, coffee and read the Times and things like that. What is your personal style for leading a company in 2025?
Yeah. I'd say I'm a very different kind of leader and entrepreneur than I was when I was in my late 20s and I started my first company. I think part of that is just you sort of learn to expend less energy. more is like, we're sort of going through our, I in technology and particularly like software and marketing software, it's been a really interesting run because we had one of the great, sort of, 12 to 15 year bull runs that like, the sort of, any industry's ever seen. And what that creates is is challenges, human challenges. So we have a lot of people who work at Yext and in other companies that we've invested in who've never seen a downturn, right? Who are mid-career and have never seen a downturn. And so this is one of the big challenges is like, I was lucky, quote, lucky that I started in the workforce in, technology in the late 90s, 1999. And so one of the first things that happened was a complete meltdown. And I, experienced in tech, it was a little bit lesser version of that during the financial crisis. And so this is my third cycle, right? But I have, people who are only, maybe 10 years younger than me who've never seen a cycle. And that's been this weird time in tech. And so you have to somehow find the way to create urgency around what we're trying to accomplish every day because the world is changing so fast that if you don't approach it with urgency, that you're going to get left behind. And then at the same time, apply a long enough horizon that you're not just chasing your tail all the time. I think this is the hardest thing about, we've seen, I think, more CEO turnover in technology companies in the last 3 or 4 years than we've seen in like 15 years before that. Everyone's coming to terms with the fact that like this is a difficult environment, but through these difficult environment, like unbelievable innovation happens. And so trying to bring a measure of, sort of equanimity to also just like, I don't really know how to describe it other than like we're trying to bring both urgency and equanimity. It's like impatience and patience together.
Urgency without panic.
Exactly. Yeah, because panic doesn't do anybody any good.
Right.
So it's but if you're asleep to the urgency of changing in this environment, then, and again, that just takes me back to why like this is different, right? Like there's no urgency here to change I think what we do here has a timelessness to it. And so it's a really nice relief to come here and think about like, decisions in terms of decades, not in terms of, days and weeks.
Sure. Okay. So you're not allowed to answer or Ohoopee for this next one, but I'm curious what your ideal day of golf looks like these days. So if it's not here, because I'm assuming it would be outside, where would you be playing? Who would you be playing with? What's the game? What's the setup on your ideal day of golf?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what's funny is this answer has changed like, massively over the last 10 years. Partly because, I think I've been so fortunate to have access to a lot of the like, it's easy to answer this question with, well, it's the, it's the longest day where we start, in Europe, and then you go to, you fly there and you play and you play a national, and then you go to, you go to Cyprus and you play 3 golf courses. Like
I didn't know that was an option, but that's
I mean, I think it's very logistically challenging, but you hear these stories about people doing stuff like that,
yes,
right?
I've heard.
And what's funny for me is I think the bar has gotten way lower in terms of like what does that ideal experience look like, and at the same time higher. So it's really about who are you with, right? So it can be it can be playing 6 holes with my family, some of whom play a lot of golf and some don't, right? It can be it's really, I mean, like, hanging out with all these kids we have here right now who are amazing golfers and just like, putting with them. I wasn't even putting. I was just with them last night where they're all putting on the outdoor putting green. And I think what's happened for me, and maybe this is because my physical, sort of ability to do these like marathon things is less than it used to be. But I think it's all just more about like the headspace is like, it's who you're with more than anything else, right? And if you're with people and there's a spirit of fun at the heart of what you're doing, then that's kind of all that matters, right? It doesn't really matter if I'm on, I actually play a lot of golf in the summer. I mean, I don't play a lot of golf in the summertime, but we spend a lot of the summer in Montauk, and therapy for me is go over and play 9 holes on Montauk Downs in the afternoon with whoever's there.
Yeah.
Right. Just, go walk up.
That
right?
Sounds like an ideal day. Sounds like a good day.
It's a great way to, kind of, I think, depressurize the whole experience. And so, I'm not sure I'm really doing a great job answering your question. But
but I do agree. I've thought a lot about recently. There's about my favorite days on the golf course, and there are a few that immediately come to mind. And they all seem to revolve around. I had 3, different combinations of people, but 3 really great people with me. We had a game that everyone had bought into. The stakes were just enough. It was like, the Goldilocks. It was like a sweet spot.
Yeah.
It came down. It was interesting, but there was a beautiful flow to the round. There was a rhythm that is very hard to replicate. And then sometimes I get bummed that doesn't work out that way when I get super psyched to play on a Saturday. And so I'm always like, how can I recreate some of my favorite days? Is it the place? Is it the people? Is it just the fact that the group ahead of us was, playing, in 4 hours, what it is. So but I think, the more I think about this, it really comes down to, it was the right combination of people, and we had something in common and it just worked.
I think, golf more and more, and the more you do it, the more it becomes like, I had a great golf match in my backyard in Montauk as the sun was setting this summer with my 2 sons and a couple of their knucklehead friends. And the match was, we had an old broken hula hoop, and we would move it from sort of place to place, and everybody had a wedge, and we were just trying to knock a ball into the hula hoop. How many The only rule was like, you're not allowed to hit over the house because the probability of sculling one through a window was high. That was like a beautiful experience of like, beer in hand, 1 club in hand, and watching the sunset, playing golf, right? Not what anybody would recognize as like, sort of high level golfer, but so it sounds silly and it sounds contrived, but like pretty much, any walk with people who I'm really excited to be with a golf club in hand is going to be a great experience.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed your company today doing this, and
not yours.
I thank you very much for the time. And I was going to ask you about the surf lodge and some things that happened there last weekend, but we'll just save that save that for a different podcast.
You'd be much more likely to get a good answer from my from my kids about that.
I think I might ask them about a certain professional golfer, but
I think I know what you're talking about. I think I heard a little bit about this, but I actually I think that's a great place, and it's been a great project, and I think my children get a lot more benefit from that.
How many reality shows ask you to film there every summer?
I don't know the answer, and that's the beauty of it is that where here I'd say I know 90% of sort of what sort of inbound comes in here, and there's 10% that the team probably protects me from. Yeah. And there it's not even, I wouldn't even know 10%. So thankfully, that's a great it's a project that we, sort of accidentally got involved in. It's been amazing, and I have amazing partners. So I don't have to know things like how many reality TV shows want to shoot there, but I'm sure it's a lot.
I think it is, according to my wife's algorithm. But anyway, no, thank you for the time, and thanks for sharing the story of Ohoopee with us.
Happy to. Thank you.